Here she goes again. Hide your face, hide your neck, duck your head, wear an NFL football helmet when you are playing in a game versus DiJonai Carrington. Fresh off of clotheslining, a Kane and Undertaker clothesline from hell that she delivered to Sophie Cunningham, this girl is right back on the court, hitting people upside the head once again. This girl needs to be kicked out of the league. She's a menace to the league at this point, and it's unsafe for players to be out there with her.
DiJonai Carrington thought the return game would be a chance to silence the noise, but instead, something happened that appeared to leave her visibly shaken. As the crowd turned on her and even chants calling for her ban echoed around the arena, the tension suddenly became impossible to ignore. But what triggered such a brutal reaction from her own fans? And why did Carrington break down when the chants got louder? Could there be more to this than what happened on the court?
It only took 2 games for dirtbag DiJonai Carrington to be back to her dirty tricks. DiJonai Carrington balled out her first game back. Ooh, under the legs. Whoa, between the legs. Wow, behind the back. I've never seen this type of play before in the WNBA. This is incredible. And then here we are, the very next game, and dirtbag DiJonai back to poking players.
The most uncomfortable moments surrounding DiJonai Carrington may have nothing to do with a basketball being thrown toward a rim, because after a controversial week that turned her name into one of the biggest talking points in the WNBA, the conversation around Carrington has gone far beyond the court.
DiJonai Carrington cannot avoid controversy. The dirtbag was back in the building tonight against the Golden State Valkyries, and once again, she cannot keep her appendages to herself. Definition of appendages: her arms, her hands. She finds a way to always use them to inflict pain on others. And she's just, quite frankly, a reckless basketball player.
What was supposed to be another chapter in her return to the floor has instead become a storm of criticism, angry reactions, and questions about whether the relationship between Carrington and some basketball fans has reached a breaking point. And if you have been following the chaos surrounding the Chicago Sky Star, you already know that this story did not begin with one game.
This girl will not stop until she ends somebody's career. DiJonai Carrington, once again, with another dirty foul in less than a week, in just a couple of days apart from each other. A couple of days apart from the Sophie Cunningham hard foul. You have Mrs. Eye Poke. Mrs. Flagrant foul, I'm going to grab your head. I'm going to hit your head upside your head, knock you out the air. Mrs. I'm going to pull your hair. Mrs. I'm going to whack you on the back of your head. Mrs. Long nailed, sharp knobbed fingertips. DiJonai Carrington strikes again.
It began with an incident against the Indiana Fever that instantly became another chapter in one of the WNBA's most emotionally charged rivalries. On August 8th, Carrington and the Sky faced Indiana in a game that quickly became overshadowed by a physical confrontation involving Sophie Cunningham. Carrington was ejected after the league ruled the play a flagrant 2, and the incident immediately exploded online. The controversy became even larger after Carrington posted the words "white privilege" following the game, turning what had already been a heated basketball argument into a much broader debate about race, sportsmanship, discipline, and how players are treated when emotions get out of control. At that point, Carrington was no longer simply being discussed as a basketball player who had committed a controversial foul. Her name had become part of a national argument. Before the current controversy, Carrington had built her reputation on toughness, intensity, and the kind of defensive pressure that coaches generally love and offensive players generally find extremely irritating.
It's the gift that keeps on giving, the lunacy, the absolute hypocrisy of the WNBA. It never ends, and I don't think it's ever going to be. You didn't expect that, did you? Of course you did. We see it every single day. You know, Stephanie White showed us she is way in over her head without telling us that she's way in over her head. Actually, she told us she's way in over her head. We'll get to that in a minute. The latest disgrace was from Stephanie White, who, by the way, was booed last night.
Then came the Caitlin Clark era. Suddenly, every physical play involving Carrington could become a social media event. The attention surrounding her became even more intense after the highly publicized 2024 incident involving Clark, when Carrington was accused of making contact with Clark's eye during a game. That moment stayed in the basketball conversation long after the final whistle, and Carrington increasingly became associated with one of the league's most polarizing storylines. But there is a difference between being criticized by opposing fans and feeling like the people watching you have completely turned against you. That distinction is important, because when a player walks into an arena, There is an expectation that the crowd may boo her if she is wearing the opposing jersey, but when criticism becomes personal, the atmosphere can feel completely different. Carrington returned in Chicago's 94-88 victory over Connecticut, providing the kind of defensive intensity that had become part of her identity. Ironically, Carrington's return to the court should have been a celebration, because after months of dealing with an injury and working her way back into basketball shape, she finally had another opportunity to remind everyone why she had earned her place in the WNBA.
Ain't even Sophie Cunningham part 2 would be Sophie Cunningham, Skylar Diggins, Kate Martin, Sarah Ashley Barker, Jessica Shepard, part 97. Caitlin Clark eye gouge, part 95 when it comes to DiJonai Carrington. Here she is on the floor being dirty once again. The girl cannot help herself at this point. She can't help it. Take a look at this. Okay, you swing at the ball, but then you hit her all in the face with your other hand, and then you put your hands up like...
She was healthy enough to compete, she was beginning another chapter with the Chicago Sky, and she was facing a franchise where she had already established herself as one of the league's most physical and competitive defenders. Instead of becoming the beginning of a quiet comeback story, however, her return quickly became another chapter in a controversy that seemed determined to follow her everywhere. That is the bizarre part about sports in the social media era, because an athlete can spend months recovering, training, studying film, rebuilding confidence, and preparing their body for competition, only for one moment during a game to overshadow everything that came before it. The conversation can shift from how well someone is playing to what they did in one possession, and suddenly an entire season is being discussed through the lens of a single incident. Once she left the court, the basketball discussion almost disappeared underneath a much larger debate about punishment, responsibility, and whether the league should take stronger action. Fans immediately began asking whether the WNBA would suspend her, whether the Chicago Sky would publicly defend her, whether additional discipline was coming, and perhaps most importantly, whether Carrington understood just how angry the situation had made people.
And I love how people say later the technical rescinded. That was the fastest rescinded technical I've ever seen. I said, oh, I went to ESPN.
It was like an hour after.
It was like technical. And then as soon as I was like technical rescinded right underneath, I was like, yeah, I think they got it right too. I don't think that there was any intention. I don't think she sought out the ref. I listen, I'm on her side on this one.
It was fast.
But again, that was the fastest. Let's take a record for that. Was that the fastest rescinded technical
No, 100%.
in the history?
As of August 10th, the WNBA had not announced a suspension, which allowed Carrington to suit up against the Seattle Storm, where she entered the game with 5:21 remaining in the first quarter. That decision created another layer of controversy because critics interpreted the absence of an immediate suspension as evidence that the league was not treating the incident seriously enough, while Carrington's supporters believed the backlash had already gone far beyond reasonable criticism. Somewhere between those two positions was Carrington herself, trying to continue playing professional basketball while her name was being dragged through an internet courtroom where practically everyone seemed to have appointed themselves judge, jury, and commissioner. The problem with an internet courtroom, of course, is that the verdict usually arrives before anyone bothers to read the evidence. Then came the fan reaction, and this is where the story becomes particularly complicated. There is credible reporting about Carrington's ejection, the backlash surrounding the incident, her social media activity, and the intense debate among WNBA fans. But the specific claim that her own fans collectively chanted "ban her," and that Carrington literally broke down because of those chants should not be treated as confirmed without reliable footage or reporting establishing that exact sequence.
DiJonai with another signature move yet again versus the Valks tonight.
And then she put both hands up.
Damn. What is she doing with her left hand? Look at her left hand. Just let me just poke you in the eye real quick. What is this goofball, uncoordinated individual doing, poking somebody in the eye with their hands up? Hands up. This is so bad. Hands up. Swipe for the ball with our right hand while poking the player in the left.
That distinction matters because the reality is already dramatic enough without adding details that cannot be verified. Carrington does not need an invented breakdown to explain why the situation could become emotionally exhausting for any professional athlete. Imagine spending years trying to establish yourself at the highest level of your sport, only to reach a point where a growing portion of the public seems more interested in your controversies than your actual basketball. Every foul becomes evidence, every reaction becomes evidence, every social media post becomes evidence, and every mistake becomes another episode in a story that refuses to end. At some point, the player is no longer simply playing basketball. She has already built a professional career based on defensive intensity, physicality, competitiveness, and the willingness to do the uncomfortable work that does not always appear in a highlight reel. Her career has included recognition as one of the league's better defenders, and her move to Chicago in 2026 represented another important chapter after she signed with the Sky. That is why reducing her entire career to one controversial incident misses the larger picture.
When someone does something like that, basketball in nature, if I poke, because I've poked people in the eyes playing basketball, I've hit people in the head playing basketball. It's a part of the sport, of course. But how you react after definitely plays a role in your character. I'm going to be real with you. You can either walk away from the situation or you can try to help them up. But acting like nothing happened or staring people down shows me a lot about your character. The fact that she got her hands up, she's not going to check on her. She's not saying, my bad, my fault. She's not checking to see, are you okay? No. Just poked her in the eyes. Bow. Went for the ball. Where the...
At the same time, Carrington cannot completely escape the uncomfortable reality of professional sports because athletes are ultimately judged by what they do when the pressure is highest. If you want the spotlight when you are making big plays, you also receive the spotlight when you make a mistake, and the second version of that attention can be considerably louder than the first. Carrington is discovering that lesson in real time. Her situation also exposes something much bigger about the modern WNBA, because games are no longer ending when the final buzzer sounds. The final whistle may stop the players, but it certainly does not stop the internet.
So, DiJonai Carrington has responded publicly for the first time since flagrantly fouling Sophie Cunningham and then posting white privilege on Threads while tagging the Indiana Fever. The only problem is her comments don't make any sense. That's the only issue I got. They're too vague to make any sense. So she responded to a Emmanuel Acho video where he said, somebody needs to share this message to DiJonai Carrington. You can't call that foul.
And Carrington's own social media activity only intensified the conversation. Following the Cunningham incident, Carrington posted the words white privilege, which immediately became another major talking point. Critics argued that the post added another controversial dimension to the situation, while supporters argued that the larger context surrounding the incident needed to be considered before judging her response. The conversation therefore moved beyond the original foul and into questions about race, accountability, discipline, and the culture surrounding the WNBA. Suddenly, the basketball itself was almost secondary. People were debating the meaning of the post, the severity of the foul, the league's disciplinary standards, Cunningham's role in the confrontation, Caitlin Clark's involvement in the broader rivalry, and the way different players are treated when controversial incidents occur. And somehow, underneath all of that noise, Carrington still had to prepare for another basketball game. That is where the irony becomes almost impossible to miss. Perhaps they are paying too much attention. Once fans choose sides, neutrality becomes almost impossible on the internet.
Again, see, this is the important part. Once again, siding with an opponent that did damage physically to one of her own players. This time it was that DiJonai Carrington, the woman who hit Sophie Cunningham around the neck with a flagrant foul. The previous one was Alyssa Thomas throat punching her star, Caitlin Clark. Both times, the most moronic of all coaches, Stephanie White, defended the other player. This time she came up with an excuse, and it's pretty good.
If you support Carrington, someone can accuse you of excusing her behavior. If you criticize Carrington, someone else can accuse you of participating in a larger agenda. If you defend Cunningham, you are suddenly part of one side of the rivalry, while defending Carrington places you on the opposite side. Meanwhile, Carrington still has practice. She still has film sessions. She still has teammates. She still has coaches. She still has flights. And most importantly, she still has games that need to be won. That is the part that often gets forgotten. When an athlete becomes the center of an online controversy, players do not receive a special schedule that says basketball will resume after social media finishes arguing about them. They have to move forward whether the internet is ready to move forward or not. For Carrington, the challenge now is not simply surviving the backlash. That may be the most frustrating part for everyone involved because Carrington can argue with critics online, but she cannot win a social media debate simply by typing faster. She can explain herself publicly, but eventually the conversation has to return to what happens between the lines. If she plays well, people will have a reason to discuss her basketball again. If she struggles, the criticism will become louder. If she makes another controversial play, the internet will probably react as though it has just discovered electricity for the first time. That is the environment she is playing in.
She's absolutely reckless, and until she actually injures somebody, will the WNBA ever do something about it? Clearly not. Now, What we saw tonight against the Golden State Valkyries pales in comparison to what happened against Sophie Cunningham. Pales in comparison to the eye gouge that Caitlin Clark received. Pales in comparison to the rake across the eyes that Rebecca Allen received.
And there is another layer to this story that makes Carrington's situation even more complicated, because she has already demonstrated that she can walk into emotionally complicated environments and perform. Her history with Connecticut is a good example. Carrington spent the early part of her professional career with the Connecticut Sun, established herself as an important defender there, and later had to face the emotional challenge of returning to play against her former organization. The question is whether she can transform that pressure into motivation instead of allowing it to consume her. That is why the next stretch of the season could become so fascinating. What she needs to prove is much simpler. She needs to demonstrate that the controversy does not control her basketball. She needs to show that one ejection does not define her. She needs to show that one social media post does not define her. Most importantly, she needs to remind people that the player who built her reputation through defense, toughness, and competitive intensity is still there underneath all the noise. Because right now, there are two very different stories being told about DJ Carrington.
Let me say that the WNBA has problems. The WNBA has a leadership problem. The WNBA has a player problem. And the WNBA has a media problem. What do I mean? Kathy Engelbert. This is the kind of stuff that happens because it has been allowed.
One story portrays her as one of the villains of the WNBA, arguing that her physical style and controversial moments have pushed fans beyond the point of patience. Carrington's story is becoming less about one foul and more about what happens when a professional athlete becomes the center of a controversy that refuses to disappear. The ejection, the criticism, the social media backlash, the debate over discipline, and the continuing conversations involving Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham have created an enormous amount of attention around one player. But underneath all of that noise, the season is still moving. The real question is not simply whether DJ Carrington can survive one angry crowd or one brutal week of criticism. The same people demanding punishment today may eventually find themselves talking about something entirely different tomorrow. That is the strange thing about sports. Fans can turn on an athlete incredibly quickly, but they can also change their minds just as quickly when the athlete gives them a reason to. For Carrington, the path forward may therefore be much simpler than the controversy itself. She cannot control every chant. What she can control is how she responds when the ball is finally placed in her hands. And if Carrington can turn all of this noise into motivation, the controversy that currently threatens to define her could eventually become nothing more than another chapter in a much bigger career. The question is whether she can make that transformation before the next controversy finds her again.